Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Base. Steve Hilton here. Kristen Garcia-Dumont along for the ride today. Kristen, we're going to be talking today about what's going on in San Francisco. I don't know really where to start. What do you think's going on in San Francisco?
What do I think's going on? Madness, mayhem,
Exactly.
crime, disease, homelessness, rampant drugs. That's the top of it.
Yeah, so we're all pretty good, basically. Nothing out of the ordinary. We've got a perfect person to help us understand what's going wrong and why and what we might be able to do about it. Before we get to him, please, of course, make sure you follow us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts for more great conversations like this one that we're about to have with John Dennis. John is the chairman of the San Francisco Republican Party. He is Nancy Pelosi's opponent for Congress. I mean, we could say it's an uphill battle, Nancy Pelosi in San Francisco, but it's definitely one worth fighting. So we're very happy that you could be with us today, John.
Thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure.
So there's a sort of long list of disasters there that Kristen outlined. Where do you want to start? Maybe the crime story, because that's just been something that has been going on for a while. Of course, this is nothing new, but it's risen to national attention in the last few weeks with the kind of organized looting that we're seeing in the city. But what's your thought on all of that?
Well, San Francisco's on the cutting edge and has always been a thought leader, and started lots of big trends, lots of little trends. I hate to think that the organized looting is going to become a national trend, but it's something that that got kicked off here. People hadn't seen anything like that before. And also that episode was particularly tough to watch because it happened in Union Square, which is in some ways the heart of the city. I mean, it's Union Square, I think before COVID, had the most expensive retail rents in the country. More than Rodeo Drive, more than Fifth Avenue.
I didn't know that.
And yeah, I mean, for many years it was, and it's certainly in the top three. I mean, it's right up there. And to have organized looting breaking into a Louis Vuitton store, just sends a message that everybody's vulnerable. Anybody, it doesn't matter where you are in the strata of society, that everyone's vulnerable in a city like San Francisco.
It's just brazen, isn't it, as well? That's the thing about it. It's just the complete disregard. Like, they know they're going to get away with it. There's just absolutely no fear, no concern. There's going to be no law enforcement. It's just do whatever you want. It's a free for. It is a real breakdown of civilized society. I mean, it's not just sort of. It's kind of deeper than crime in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm just thinking. I'm sorry to give you some anecdotal stuff here, but I've been in the same house for nearly 30 years. I live in a nice neighborhood, Pacific Heights.
Very fancy. And you've done very well, John. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Well, I think I was doing better when I was 29 when I bought the property, but because I'm not so sure I could buy the same place today. But having said that, I mean, I've seen a lot of things happen in the neighborhood over the years, and in 3 times in the last month, someone broke into my garage. And
what? Hang on, 3 times in 1 month?
Yeah. What they did was they picked the lock for that. You have a cable that you need in emergencies when the electricity goes out. They picked that lock and went in. It didn't really take anything, but after the 3rd time, I called the lock company, actually the security company, and brought them in. And I said, "Wow, what should I do? Should I put cameras up and maybe some motion sensors for lights?" And they said to me, "Don't bother putting up cameras anymore." Because they don't care about the cameras. And so when you talk about brazen and what happened in Louis Vuitton, I mean, the security companies, prominent security companies are telling Pacific Heights residents in San Francisco, don't bother putting up cameras.
And it's not unique to San Francisco. We got a similar warning. So where we live, there's been a ton of break-ins. A lot of people for COVID moved somewhere else, right, or had a second home that they were spending time in. So there was a massive rash of burglaries, and the cops said the same thing. Don't bother with the cameras. Actually, what you want is noise. So it's better to have one of those sort of old school, I think of like the red bell alarms, because you need to get attention. And the point being, because someone else needs to intervene, because by the time the cops get there, it's going to be too late. And they're a little bit like, there's not much we can do anyway. And, what really is so stunning about these smash and grabs in San Francisco is I don't know that I can remember a time where the cops were demoralized. Everybody watched it and knew they were going to get away with it. And the cops are like, yeah, they probably will. Because even if we round a couple of them up, what are we going to do about it? Chesa's not going to charge them. The DAs aren't going to charge them. And so to have the cops demoralized on top of it is really, I think, a novel thing. But what do you think, John?
Dead spot on. I mean, going back a few years ago, I'm friends with a number of police officers. A lot of them are Republicans, by the way, not surprisingly, and they're completely demoralized.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just like appendages. I did a ride around a couple of years ago with a few of them, and they're, while people are going out and committing serious crimes, we were in like apartments settling disputes between a couple of people whose dogs got into a spat at the dog park, people arguing over someone knocking on their door too hard. I mean, this is the sort of stuff that the police have been reduced to. Meanwhile, there's every day there's video posted on the internet of people walking into retail shops and just grabbing things and walking out.
And it just sends that message that you can get away with anything. So, of course, someone can say, well, in the end, Louis Vuitton, whatever, that's just, like an elitist store and who cares? But actually, it's actually reflective of what's going on right across the board because people know they can get away with it. And right at the other end, this was actually not San Francisco, it was Los Angeles, but you see it's just a recent video, which is two guys coming up and attacking a young mother with she had a baby in the stroller, and they came up to her and just attacked her and robbed her. And you just think this is just sick. And that's what's so disgusting about all of this, that the policies and the practices and the ideology that's led to all this is empowering and giving succor to the absolute worst kind of people in society who would just who have no shame, no limits on their behavior. It is completely disgusting. I just want to quickly talk about the police point because it's very interesting you mentioned that. I'd love to hear more about that, especially because you're right there in the city and you really know it so well. I noticed that just recently, a police officer from, I think she was in Bayview in San Francisco. She was on Fox. She appeared on Tucker Carlson's show to talk about all this, and I thought, oh my God, that takes a lot of courage these days, right? For a police, like, what must be the pressure if a police officer? I think she's also, has some role in the citywide organization of the police. I don't know exactly what, like in the union or whatever. And but she was speaking up on behalf of law enforcement on Fox News. Just imagine like how bad things must have got that she feels that she needs to do that and is going to be driven to that. What is going on with the police versus the criminal, the rest of the criminal justice system in San Francisco, that it would have pushed her so far that she would do that?
Yeah, I saw that segment. She was very brave, and I was grateful that she went on and actually, spoke on behalf of the police. I think she's the executive vice president, or she has a leadership position in the POA.
Yeah.
Well, the political class, in charge political class, has a kind of a quiet and sometimes not so quiet war against the police. A few years ago, a supervisor in District 2, on election, celebrating her election night victory in front of the cameras, led the crowd in a chant of "F the POA."
Oh yes, I'd forgotten that. That's right.
And by the way, also on the stand with her at the time were several other prominent politicians, including the current chairman of the Democratic Central Committee here in San Francisco. Very powerful committee when they give endorsements at Democratic Central Committee, particularly on the down ballot races, those people are automatically elected. That's why we have the school board that we have, the school board that wants to changed the names of Washington and Lincoln High School, and that guy was on there chanting right along, laughing right along with that woman. So, and that extends also to Chesa Boudin, who I don't think we're going to be able to avoid in this conversation.
Yeah,
Chesa Boudin, has a instead of a victim's point of view in terms of law enforcement, has a criminal's point of view from the law enforcement. He's more concerned about what's happening with the criminals first, except when it comes to the police. And he has promised and followed through on his promise to aggressively pursue any minor mistake that a police officer makes. So, you have to ask yourself, you have a situation where the state government has, created laws that make it difficult to do their jobs. Instead of trying to correct that imbalance on the local level, the local district attorney actually made things worse and aggressively pursues police in it for any minor infraction they might make, and then they're sent down into a community that basically looks down on them. It's a very it's humiliating, and it's demoralizing, and we are now down 400 police officers in San Francisco.
Wow. Give us a sense of the context. So how many? Out of how many? What's that look like? So
the city charter for many years had about just under 2,000 required to have 2,000 police officers. They increased that a little bit, but now we're down to about 1,500 or 1,600 police officers.
That's a huge change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is it vaccines? Is it morale?
No,
What's the big driver?
No, Kristen, it's been drifting down for a long time. It's because people are demoralized. I mean, I know a guy. I don't want to give too many details, but he moved to another.
Give the details. We want the details.
No. All right. Well, I mean, this is not something that the public knows about. Former police captain of the Northern Precinct moved over to the sheriff's department, and just felt like he was in line to continue moving up in the police department, but just felt like the sheriff's department was a better place to be. Sheriff's department's a little more autonomous and doesn't quite have isn't in the sights of politicians quite as much as the police department.
Interesting.
But he left. I mean,
this isn't a question. This is a comment on social media, and maybe I'm going to feed into Steve's view that kids shouldn't have cell phones or smartphones. But my oldest boy came to me, this is years ago, obviously uses social media, and started on down this road of we should get rid of qualified immunity for cops. And I thought, this is not something he's like learning in the school, this is sort of a random kind of thing of where is he getting this? And there was a big, I don't want to say campaign because that makes it sound like it was intentional, but there was a lot of pushing of information on Snapchat, Reddit, and other social media sites that was extremely anti-cop, starting literally years ago, so that by the time you get, now he's a voter, he's very receptive to the cops are evil, cops are bad, they do more harm than they do good. There's a different way to train them. He's very sort of predisposed to believe those arguments, largely because he was getting very inundated with these, kind of crazy videos where one bad apple is supposedly represents all police officers. And we had to have a long discussion about, you don't understand how any of this works. Like the whole fact of qualified immunity is saying that as long as the police officer is acting within the course and scope of their employment and using, proper techniques per their training, they're not going to be liable, right? If they're outside the scope, right? So if they are doing these horrible acts, leaning on necks for 10 minutes, whatever it may be, then that is outside the scope and they will be liable for that conduct. But nobody ever tells the truth to these, up and coming voters. So I'm very, there's a little bit of the society got softened when we parents weren't paying attention. And now that they're voters, they're enacting, because Chesa Boudin did not hide the kind of person that he was. He was very anti-cop, pro-criminal. This wasn't a secret.
He was the public defender, right? That was his role, wasn't he?
Yeah, and we also have another big problem in San Francisco called ranked choice voting, which the progressives have used very well, and somehow it inures to their favor. I'm doing some research on this right now. We actually have created some alternative ways of counting ranked choice votes, but Chesa Boudin he got fewer than 25% of the first choice votes of most people. So he would not have won had we just had straight up voting system. And if we just we also have the top two system in the state. I mean, I think it's pretty clear he would not have won in a top two situation. So so he also brings a lot of personal emotional baggage to the job, in that his father was a member of the Weather Underground. He was raised by Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dorn. I mean, if Hollywood presented this script to us, I think we'd laugh. I mean, you're aware of this, right? That who he was raised by and all that.
Yeah, but we've never talked about it actually on the show. So I'd love you to keep going on this. I think people would be interested who may not know this.
Yeah, I mean, his dad was a lookout on a bank robbery for the Weather Underground, which was a radical Marxist group looking to overthrow the structures of society. I think we're hearing that again these days. And, in the course of that robbery, 2 off-duty police officers were killed. His dad was put in jail for life. And Chesa saw that as a grave injustice and looked at criminal justice reform when it comes to offenders, and wanted to make some radical changes. And I think he kind of soft pedaled them in a way, just to sort of focused on nonviolent drug users who were being roughed up in the system, that sort of thing, the sorts of things that people could reach out and touch and relate to. But the deep roots of it were the injustice that he felt. Something, by the way, he didn't hide. I mean, if you look at his Twitter feed, he talked glowingly about his dad all the time, and finally prevailed upon the disgraced Andrew Cuomo to just recently pardon his dad or commute his sentence in New York State. And that, and then being around the radicals like Bernadine Dorn and Bill Ayers clearly had their impact on him. And, he's brought to San Francisco this philosophy of restorative justice and, trying to see things from the criminal's point of view. So we are in effect, living out Chesa Boudin's, sociology experiment here in San Francisco.
It's amazing. I mean, look, it's so hard, this conversation, in some ways, because there's kind of a basic point, which is that, all the research shows, I think I'm right in saying, that actually the most important deterrent for crime is the idea that criminals should know, or potential criminals should know, that there is a very strong likelihood, if not certainty, that if you do something wrong, you will be caught and you will be prosecuted and convicted and punished. That's more important. The certainty of that is more important than the actual severity of the punishment. That's what the research shows in many countries. Certainly, what I saw when I was working all this back in the UK. But then you've got and so that's all true, and therefore the sense that you have to be strong and tough when it comes to crime is just a sort of basic truth about it. But it's also true that in some cases, in some ways, the system has gone wrong, that there may have been too many non-violent offenders in jail, and that doesn't help, and so on. Even with restorative justice, which I think, on a sort of human level, you can understand that for some certain things, like, I don't know, a neighborhood dispute or whatever, maybe that's the right approach. Just like you do with your kids. If they do something wrong, you make them sit down and apologize and whatever. It's not all crazy. But what they do is take something that may be applicable in certain specific limited ways and just apply it to the whole system, including to violent crime, and and you see, and then when that happens, it's just total chaos. That's what's so unhelpful about what's going on, is that it also discredits some actually potentially quite valuable reforms that could be useful if they were applied in a limited way. I want to ask you also, John, about the trajectory here, because we talk about Chesa Boudin, very interesting to hear his background, but it didn't start with him. I mean, this has been going on for years, right? Ever since we've moved here, people, we don't live in the city, but in San Francisco, but people who I, friends who do, and people who I've worked with this, I've been hearing stories for years about, I mean, you had your story of the the garage broken into 3 times, I think. I've had literally people saying, my car's been broken into 3 times in the last week or whatever. That's just been such a common occurrence. It's been going on for a long time, hasn't it?
Well, it has. I mean, you can't talk to anybody in San Francisco who hasn't either personally had a bad experience with criminals, or is one degree removed from someone who has. We had someone. I don't want to get lost in this, but we had somebody walk in our home in the middle of the night like 5 years ago. My wife and my daughter and I are sleeping.
What?
Yeah. But and I want to actually, I'll incorporate that into this. I mean, just so you know, I'm not some, delicate flower. I grew up in a public housing project in Jersey City, New Jersey. Right. I went to college in the Bronx. I took up boxing on the south side of Chicago. These things, crime and toughness and that sort of thing is not completely alien to me. But even when I lived in the projects, no one would walk in your home in the middle of the night or at any time for that matter. And some guy, walked in. We just happened to keep that door unlocked, because a puppy was sick that night. So he, walked in and the light, we had a motion sensor light that went on, and he said to my wife jumped up. She was a lighter sleeper than I am. And he said, "Oh, I'm in the wrong house. I'm in the wrong house." And she said, "Okay." And he just walked out. We thought he was going to see our neighbor. And, we locked the door, and because he could have kind of looked like a guy who would be our neighbor's friend. He was a millennial type. And I saw my neighbor the next day, and I said, "Hey, it happened again. Your friend walked into our house." And he said, "I didn't have anybody over last night." Wow. And, yeah. So, there's quite a bit more to the story. Okay. But you're talking about trajectory. This guy ended up, this was his game, hot prowling. Which I don't know if it's worse that he does it, or that it happens so often that there's a name for it. But okay.
Exactly.
Hot prowl. He was hot prowling somebody else, and they detained him and arrested him. And I will say that the guy ended up going away for about 4 years. That was resolved. And that was just 5 years ago that happened. So things have changed dramatically since then.
Oh, interesting.
And even when I moved out, when I moved here, 30 years ago, there was the Democrats were much more blue collar. The progressives were, much weaker. They were there, but not quite as strong as they are now. And, the blue collar element in the Democrat Party, with which I'm familiar coming from a place like Jersey City, they wouldn't put up with what we're dealing with right now. Exactly. And what's happened is the city's gotten gentrified. We have more billionaires per capita in San Francisco than anywhere on earth. As the city's gotten richer and more gentrified, that blue collar element has been, pushed out of town. Gentrified out of town, and what we're left with are the effete indoctrinaire students, trying to replicate or develop their sociology professors' theories on a big American city, and so like when you and I when we met, it was about 4 years ago, Steve. Briefly, I was running for supervisor at the time, and you're campaigning quite a bit. And at one point, we just stopped talking to anybody under the age of 35. And I'm sorry to say this, but women under the age of 40 at least. Because they were just so intransigent and unwilling to accept a different point of view that it was just really not worth their time.
So, what moved the state so left? I mean, I grew up in California. And it was pretty moderate. I mean, it was right leaning moderate. But it's not just blue. It is radical blue. And so this sort of goes to you in trying to run, how did it become like this? And is the pendulum going to swing back? And that's why you're hopeful that Republicans can win now?
Yeah. Well, so I've given you this sort of dark picture, which is real, I think.
Real, yeah.
It's real. But I have to tell you, I have never I've been involved with San Francisco Republican politics for about 15 years. I've never had as many inquiries about our candidates than we're getting now. And it's not just because I'm my position as a chairman, and but people are just they want an alternative. I mean, look, the last Republican mayor was elected in this town in 1960. The last elected supervisor, was elected in the early 70s. I think it was 73. So Democrats have been running the town for 50 years, and there's no Republican in City Hall they can blame these problems on.
Yeah,
they
look at the state of it. Exactly.
This problem.
Look at the state, and it's all up and down, right? Every level, the state, the legislature, the government. There's nowhere else. There's nowhere to hide from accountability for what they've done.
So we have a long way to go before we're electing Republicans in San Francisco, but I think on the state level, there are opportunities. I think the right candidate can do it. And also, I mean, I always hold out a little bit of hope because I grew up, as I said before, in the Jersey City, New York area. And, Rudy Giuliani was a Republican running in New York and won.
Yeah, I just want to ask you, but let's just focus on San Francisco because you're the expert there. And it is the kind of ultimate kind of bastion of this kind of elitist, kind of woke left madness that we're seeing everywhere. Let's just talk about that. So I noticed in the, I don't know if it's the same day as the Virginia elections, or it must have been. Yeah, it was the same day. It was November, the first Tuesday in November. So on that day, there were some local elections I noticed in New York, and Republicans were elected in districts that hadn't had a Republican for ages. And I think I may be getting this wrong. People can check and look it up, but I think it was Queens. These AOC's district, I think, something like that, right? Really surprising victories for Republican candidates at the local level in New York. And I don't know if the political kind of gap that they had to overcome was as great as you see in San Francisco, but it was just interesting. And I just wonder why is it, what do you hear when you're out campaigning, and what is that like? What are the kind of things they say? What are the reasons that people would give for saying, are you kidding? I'd never vote Republican. What's that about? Even when they see things going wrong. So we, for lack of a better way to put this, we sort of suffer the sins of the national party in the city, and I really shouldn't blame them. I mean, the media has done such a powerful job of painting the Republican Party as the party of religious zealots and lunatics and, people all, handling snakes and
racists.
Racists.
Yes, at this point, I'm just thinking of doing the Hillary Clinton racist, homophobic, Islamophobe. That's the thing, isn't it? It's the Hillary Clinton deplorables list.
It's quite. I mean, it's really successful. I talked to a couple of friends of mine, all successful guys in their 50s. It was all within a week, and all of them said, "Yeah, we got to really do something about this white supremacy problem." And
what? Who said that?
3 San Francisco guys, successful guys, stockbrokers, lawyers. And they really saw white supremacy as a problem. Some Republicans, by the way, moderate Republicans.
Sorry, I just want to really understand what you're saying. A problem for the Republican Party, or a national problem that the Republicans were partly responsible for?
Okay, I had the same reaction with all 3 of them when they brought it up to me. As you can imagine, my position, people bring politics conversations to me. And in the course of each of those quick conversations, each of them said, we have got to do do something about this white supremacy problem as a national problem.
Right.
This is stunning, as if it actually is this big national problem and we need to fix it, or that we're being called white supremacists.
As if it's a big national problem that we have to deal with. They, didn't extend it to a specific problem for the Republican Party, but I suspect that with the conversation, each of those conversations could have gone that way. But to me, what it said was, it just showed the effectiveness of media programming on just about any vulnerable mind, because I want to emphasize all 3 of these guys are quite successful. I mean, bright, and I'm sorry, as if it mattered, but I mean, they are white guys, and they all saw it as a real problem. And it also, those conversations were illuminating too, because I think what you said before was insightful, Steve, about how progressives do that nose under the tent kind of thing, where they give you the soft version of what they're trying to address, the problems they want to address. And I think, most people in this country are decent and they want to, do the right thing. But once they start on that trajectory, they end up going into a place where, you have the lunacy that we see, within the progressive scene now.
But if you
I'm sorry. This is why conservatives lose. This actually makes me crazy. Like when conservatives absorb this ridiculous messaging, and then there's this I need 20 lashes because I might know someone who knows someone. It's such absolute bullshit. I've said this before. Do you know anyone who's a white supremacist? I don't. Steve doesn't. No one we interact with knows someone who's actually a white supremacist. It's a totally fake problem.
Okay,
it's totally fake.
This is something that really offends me about this whole conversation. And I don't know if have you been to the top of my Twitter feed? Have you seen that confrontation I had with the Antifa guy?
Yes. Okay. It's pinned.
Yeah, it's pinned to the top.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been viewed 3.2 million times, Steve.
Yeah.
Right? Trump retweeted it. And it was a situation where I was just exasperated because I was trying to diffuse the situation where Antifa people were attacking us because we were cleaning the streets of San Francisco, right? And this guy comes up to me and his nice icebreaker, "I want you dead," is what he says to me. And and I said, "Why?" And he goes, "Because you're a racist." And I'm just like, can you? Okay, listen, think about this for a second. I grew up in a public housing project in Jersey City, New Jersey. I played sports with people of all races, and I've hired so many people and done so many things in my life, and to just sort of put, of all people, that label on me just tells you how unbelievably effective the persuasion is.
I agree with that. Yeah. I totally agree that there is a huge proportion of totally outrageous false smearing that goes on. Case in point, Larry Elder in the recall.
Totally.
And that sort of stuff about
he's a white supremacist too.
The black face of white supremacy. So that's a great example.
Yeah.
And then that gets shared around and whatever. And no one brought that. So I 100% agree with that. However, I think it's also true, and this is perhaps what you were getting at, where you talked about the sins of the National Party, and I'd like to sort of hear you to go a little bit deeper into that, actually, because I think it's important, is that it doesn't help when you have people who are elected in incredibly places that are the opposite of San Francisco, places where it's like it's 80% Republican and very conservative, whatever. And so there's no sort of pressure to moderate the language or whatever. And then they pop up. And again, even if it's unfair or presented in an unfair way, I'm thinking specifically, we've just had a recent example with Lauren Boebert, from Colorado. And that just gets kind of amplified and smeared and distorted, and it just doesn't help. And so you've got to be really careful to not give ammunition to the critics who want to do the smearing and have any excuse. So what did you mean when you said sins of the National Party? I'm interested in that.
Yeah, I think, just specifically what I said, that we're a party of, intolerant, religious zealots.
It's the caricature.
It's a total caricature. Right. Yeah.
Of course, it's a caricature, right. But do you think that there's any, I think that it's particularly when you look at, maybe it's you shouldn't ever hope to win in San Francisco, although I actually don't agree with that. I think in the end, if you've got really disastrous performance by these Democrats, in the end, that you can't do this to people forever and expect that you're going to get reelected. I think even in San Francisco, I hope it may not be next year. Are you running again for Congress next year?
Yes.
So I don't know. You're going to tell me you think you can. It's always hope, but it may not be next year. But I think that I don't know. I believe that it'll happen. You just can't treat people this badly. And produce outcomes this disastrous, and hope and keep being reelected. However, I just think that you've got to be aware of the fact that the places are different, and you need to kind of speak about issues and conduct yourself in a different way in California if you're trying to get elected as a Republican than you do in other parts of the country. That's just a reality.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, and the San Francisco Republican Party is so, unbelievably reasonable and moderate. Me personally, I'm in the libertarian wing of the party.
Right.
Ron Paul campaigned for me here.
Right.
One of the few people who can say that he campaigned. I'm friends with Rand Paul. That's the part of the party with which I affiliate, which is very, I mean, when I first ran against Pelosi, The Nation wrote an article about how I was running to the left of Pelosi on issues like civil liberty and war.
Yeah.
So
interesting. I think it's a really interesting combination. So I just want to make sure everyone's clear what I'm saying. I think that, and actually, Kristen, I'd love your view on this, which is like, I really reacted to when you said moderate. I'm not talking about being moderate at all. And I think a really interesting example of that actually was Glenn Youngkin just now in Virginia, where he had an incredibly clear and strong and not at all moderate position on the kind of evil, racist, wokist CRT stuff, right? He wasn't moderate. He was actually very strong and clear, and yet presented that in a way that was attractive. And I just think that and I think the assumption is always made that to be a successful Republican in California, you'll be moderate. I don't agree with that. You've just got to make the case in ways that win people over, and you've got to, and actually on some of these issues, you've got the right answer you're not going to be moderate on fighting crime. No, you've got to be really strong and tough on fighting crime, but you present the argument in a way that doesn't make you sound like some kind of, I don't know, what do you know what I mean? It's
Totally.
not about being moderate, actually. Kristen, what do you think?
Well, he linked it to parents' rights, which was an effective spin on it, which is like, well, that's what's at the heart of all of this. Is I've got my opponent who says parents' rights, be damned, who cares, right? These institutions get to decide, and I'm going to fight for our parents. But and I'm not a part of the GOP. I get harassed all the time. I'm like pox on everybody's houses. I'm more of the just who's fighting for the working class person. That's who I want. And I really don't care what side you're on. But I really do get pissed off about this point about the GOP and conservatives being called racist because it's effective, and apologizing for it all the time and people internalizing it is just absolutely outrageous. We all should be fighting racism where it exists. Period, full stop. If you are a white supremacist, you're an ass, and horrible things should befall you.
Yeah.
I think the majority of the country actually agrees with this.
Yeah, totally.
But why conservatives got this label people need to punch back. We don't care that Biden eulogized an actual Klan member. We don't care that Ralph Northam was in blackface. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
I say it the whole time. I used to tiptoe around it a little bit on my Fox show, where I'd sort of, I can't stand Biden. I think he's the absolute worst, but the fact he's just this sort of total sort of 50 years career politician, totally corrupt, completely the puppet of his donors and the unions, same thing. And so I've always really thought he's the worst example of politics.
Totally.
And I've said that very clearly. And I've, focused on this race thing, because if you look at what he's saying, so the way I put it for quite a long time was, I don't want to call him a racist. I don't want to be be as bad as them and make these false accusations or whatever. So I use this, but when you look at the way he would speak, for example, there's those clips of him, in the past, in Delaware, you can't run a 7-Eleven without a slight Indian accent. White kids are just as smart as poor kids are just as smart as white kids. The thing about Obama, the first clean, articulate African, etc. Right? He's had these kind of comments. So I would say, the way I used to put it was, he has a racist mindset, okay? That he's thinking about things with the mindset of a racist, may not be consciously described. But then, recently, you just think, no, actually, he really is an out-and-out old-fashioned racist. The way he called Cedric Richmond, who works in Boyd, right? That's just racist. I mean, there's no way you can call that anything other than racist. And I think we should say that. And I think you're completely right. And I think it's a very important way of getting into all this, which is to say, actually, to attack, a bit like you were saying earlier, John, on some other issues, attack them from the left, right? Yeah. They are the racists with this woke CRT nonsense. They are the ones who are causing poverty. They are the ones who are for the rich. They are the ones who are promoting inequality. They're the ones doing this. And I think that is a way of showing your values, but also holding them accountable for their failures.
If you look at it, I think a lot of the CRT stuff, I think a lot of the Chesa Boudin approach to criminal justice is a way of masking the failures of the Democrat Party.
Exactly.
I mean, the Democrat Party has been, why is it that, well, listen, here's what we know. We know the fatherless kids, tend to, end up in the criminal justice system, right? And all the Democrat policies have driven
Yes.
families apart of all, by the way, not just minorities, but anybody who's poor pretty much, has been hurt by Democrat policies. And because they cannot accept their mistakes, they're just pursuing more wild approaches, just because they can't, show a little humility and say, hey, maybe we need to do a course correction.
Yeah.
I do want to jump back to one thing though, Steve. What I meant was we were talking about two separate things. We were talking about the Republican Party. We were talking about Youngkin. So, individual candidates, I think, shouldn't be some milquetoast moderate.
Yeah.
Take your positions and defend them and make your case to the people. Fit them with, hopefully they fit the district and it works. But I'm talking about in terms of as a group, the elected San Francisco Republican Party, because they come from all these different places. We have all different types of people there. We're really kind of, in the end, when you look at our positions, they're kind of, well reasoned and in the end, sort of like moderate.
You've got to fight.
Yeah.
It's the energy and the attitude.
Exactly.
I totally agree with that. Yeah. I completely
Yes.
And it's a melding of, that's what parties are. I mean, the Democrat Party used to have something like, now because they've been in power in places like California, and so there's such strong positions in California, especially in San Francisco. The extremists have taken over. It's become like a religion, and they don't talk about the issues that are affecting real people's lives on the street.
Yes.
What they talk about is fidelity to the faith, to the cult, and to the religious tenets of progressivism. And they're completely disconnected for the voter, which I think creates an opportunity for Republicans in places like San Francisco.
Well, listen, we got to wrap it up in a second, but I can't let you go, John, without asking you for your analysis, please, of the performance of San Francisco's mayor, London Breed. How is she doing?
Well, I held out hope for her at the outset, just because she wanted to take sort of a centrist position. But her whole campaign was based on her life story, which I kind of connected to because she also grew up in a public housing project. But that was, she's basically shown that she cannot handle the progressives. She's gotten really nothing done, and the city is devolved into turmoil. We have, they keep saying it's a homeless problem. I think it's a drug addiction problem. We have an open air drug market that is ruining lives, and people are dying at record rates of overdoses on the streets of San Francisco. The mayor has to take responsibility. She has to be held to account for that, because no one has failed on the level that she's failing ever in the history of the city. I'd say probably very few cities.
Yeah, I just want to also talk about the masks, please, Kristen. Can we just do that?
I'm always up for talking about masks.
I mean, her total, what is it? It's an endless parade of
hypocrisy. Totally. Well, it was recent again. I mean, she's not wearing it again. And we applaud her. That's the point. It's like, we applaud, don't wear the mask.
Good for her.
But don't, now you're mandating it for everyone else.
She's just feeling the spirit.
Yes.
Yeah. I've been feeling the spirit lately, but I keep getting asked to get my mask put on.
I think it's a legal exemption.
Yeah.
Feel the spirit exemption.
She's so ridiculous. It's so embarrassing. To come back to where we started, it's a great, I mean, like we've, as we say often on this show, we love California. We love the Bay Area. We're staying and fighting. And so that's what this show is all about. But when you see people like that, my God, it's such an embarrassment. Final thoughts, Kristen?
Well, I mean, God bless people like John. I mean, and I'm being totally serious we need more people who are saying, you know what, I'm going to check the odds, and I'm going to be a realist about it, but I'm going to throw my hat in the ring and I'm going to run. I mean, we need more people running who are actually just honest people who have reasonable points of view, who want to change the state and the city for the better. And until more people throw their hat in the ring, we get what we deserve, because the policies are just going to keep coming unless we're electing people like John.
John, close us out.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's very kind of you to say. I have to tell you, I remember the moment that I told my wife I was going to go out to a protest, and I was like, okay, this is me getting involved in politics now. And it was a little, she was a little nervous about it, and I was a little nervous about it. But I have to tell you, it's been utterly and completely liberating to be able to be known in this community as the guy who's not going along with this program. I'm not going to watch San Francisco go down the tubes without letting my point of view be known. So very kind of you to say that. I'm happy to wear the targets on my back. I'm in a position where I can do that, and I feel great about fighting for what I think is the greatest city in the world. Fighting against the people who want to ruin it. So I'm happy to do it.
Good for you. Where can people follow you and keep up with your work, John?
Well, you can follow Real John Dennis on Twitter. I'd be grateful if you followed me there. I have Facebook pages, but Twitter is the best place, Real John Dennis, and then also JohnDennisForCongress.com.
There you are. Well, good luck with all of that. It was a great pleasure talking to you today. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, John.